Axis of evil. It's just 3 words, right? But they have this incredible weight. You hear them, and you're instantly taken back to the early 2000s.
Oh, absolutely.
That, grainy news footage, the constant tension of that whole post-9/11 world. It sounds less like foreign policy and more like the title of a summer blockbuster.
It does. It has a very cinematic quality. It's dramatic, it's memorable, and it's absolute. But as we were digging through the sources for today, the memoirs, the diplomatic cables, what really jumps out is that those 3 words weren't just some catchy soundbite.
No.
They were a pivot point. They fundamentally rewired American foreign policy, and I'd argue they kind of froze our diplomatic imagination for a generation.
That's exactly what we're getting into today. We're not just, recounting the speech. We're trying to unpack the black box of how this very specific phrase was engineered.
And why those countries...
Exactly. Why those wildly different countries got glued together and the huge diplomatic fallout that was happening behind the scenes, stuff the public really didn't see for years. We're going to look at how a speechwriter trying to channel FDR, of all people, ended up, maybe accidentally, sabotaging a secret back channel with Iran.
And how the term has sort of zombie-walked its way back into politics today in 2024 with a whole new cast of characters. The mission here really is to move beyond the slogan.
Right.
We all know the phrase, but the logic they used to justify linking Iran, Iraq, and North Korea was actually quite specific, and it was highly controversial, even inside the White House itself.
So let's set the scene. It's January 29, 2002.
The State of the Union address.
And context is everything here. We are less than 5 months out from the September 11th attacks. The rubble at Ground Zero is, arguably still smoldering in the national psyche. The war in Afghanistan is underway, the Taliban's on the run, and President George W. Bush steps up to the podium to basically define the next phase of the war on terror.
The atmosphere in that room and in the country was just electric. You have to remember, the nation was unified in this mix of fear and resolve. And Bush needed to explain that the threat wasn't just a stateless group like al-Qaeda hiding out in caves. He wanted to pivot.
To pivot the focus to state sponsors.
Exactly.
And he names names. He specifically calls out North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. He accuses them of seeking weapons of mass destruction, of threatening world peace, and then he drops the hammer.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
It was a thunderclap. But this is where the research gets so fascinating, because we assume this phrase came from, a room full of generals looking at a map.
But it didn't, not at all. It came from a laptop in a speechwriter's office.
This is the David Frum story.
Right.
And I was reading his memoirs on this. He was a speechwriter for Bush. And he gets this assignment from the head speechwriter, Michael Gerson. So it sounds almost impossible.
Right.
Gerson tells him, make the case for removing Saddam Hussein, but do it in like 2 sentences.
So where does he go for inspiration? He goes back to FDR. He starts rereading the date, which will live in infamy speech.
Pearl Harbor speech.
Yeah, from 1941, he was looking for a historical template, a way to rally a nation against a threat that came from multiple directions.
But that comparison, it's pretty fraught with problems, isn't it? In 1941, you had Germany and Japan. These were industrial giants, global military powers.
Right.
In 2002, you have Iraq, which was sanctioned and contained, and Iran, a regional power, sure, but not exactly the Third Reich. It feels like a huge stretch.
It was a massive rhetorical leap, no question. But he latched onto this really specific psychological detail from the World War II dynamic.
Okay.
He realized that the original Axis powers, Germany, Japan, Italy, they didn't actually like each other. They didn't really trust each other or coordinate strategy. Berlin and Tokyo weren't, syncing up their invasions. It was a total marriage of convenience.
So the lack of trust between them was the feature, not the bug of the analogy.
Precisely. That was Frum's whole point. His argument was that even if Iran, Iraq, and North Korea weren't allies, in fact, even if they hated each other, they shared this resentment of the West and a desire to disrupt the global order.
And in the first draft, he called it the axis of hatred.
Axis of hatred.
It lands so differently, doesn't it? It sounds emotional, almost manageable.
And that is the crucial distinction, because you can negotiate with hatred. Hatred is a human feeling. It can cool down. You can manage it with diplomacy.
Yeah.
But when President Bush changed it to axis of evil to make it sound more resolute, more theological, he changed the entire strategic landscape.
Because you can't negotiate with evil.
Exactly. Or rather, you shouldn't. Evil is an absolute. You have to destroy evil or contain it until it collapses on itself. By shifting the language from, say, political opposition to moral theology, the administration basically signaled that diplomacy was off the table.
It kind of cornered them, didn't it?
It did, into a stance of permanent confrontation.
And the grouping itself, I mean, the actual members of this club, drew immediate fire from foreign policy realists, grouping Iran and Iraq together.
Well, yeah.
They had just spent the entire 1980s killing each other
Yeah.
in one of the most brutal wars of the 20th century. Saddam and the Ayatollahs were mortal enemies.
That was the big enemy of my enemy criticism. It confused everyone in the region. To the Iranians, being lumped in with Saddam Hussein it was insulting. And then you throw in North Korea, a hermit kingdom in East Asia with zero connection to the other two.
Right.
And it just looked like a grab bag of bad actors, not a coherent alliance.
Plus, the 9/11 connection was so thin, none of the hijackers were from these countries. Al-Qaeda was Sunni extremist. Iran is a Shia theocracy that saw Al-Qaeda as a direct threat. All that nuance just got completely flattened.
Flattened is the perfect word. But the tragedy of this flattening isn't just academic. And for me, this brings us to the most heartbreaking part of the entire research file.
The story of Ryan Crocker. This part, this just blew my mind. So Ryan Crocker is a senior State Department official. And the sources show that right after 9/11, I mean, while the dust is still settling,
Right.
he's on a plane to Geneva for secret meetings.
Yeah.
And who was he meeting with? Iranian diplomats.
This is the great sliding doors moment of modern history. For months, the U.S. and Iran were cooperating. They had a shared enemy in the Taliban. Iran hated the Taliban.
Of course.
So in Geneva, you have Iranian diplomats sitting across from Crocker, literally spreading out maps, pointing out Taliban positions, sharing intelligence.
The sources even say the Iranians offered to rescue downed American pilots, if it came to that. This wasn't just talk. This is real operational support.
It was real politic in action, a convergence of interests. And then the State of the Union happens. Crocker's in Geneva. He's building this fragile trust.
And suddenly the president goes on global television and declares Iran part of the axis of evil.
And the door just slams shut instantly. The Iranian diplomats were humiliated.
Oh, I can't imagine.
They'd gone out on a limb with their own hardliners in Tehran to engage with the great Satan, hoping for a real thaw. And they just got slapped in the face.
The hardliners back in Tehran, the guys who chant death to America, they basically got to turn to the moderates and say,
"We told you so.
We told you so. You can't trust them. They think we're evil."
It completely killed the reformist movement in Iran for that entire cycle. President Khatami, who's a moderate, he'd expressed sympathy for 9/11 victims. There were actual candlelight vigils in Tehran.
Wow.
And this speech just validated the hardliner narrative. And from that point on, Iran accelerates its nuclear program and its support for proxies. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. We called them an enemy, so they started acting like one.
And the term didn't even stop there. It sort of became a franchise, didn't it? A few months later, you have John Bolton giving a speech called Beyond the Axis of Evil.
Oh, yeah. Adding Libya, Syria, and Cuba to the list.
It's like they were expanding the cinematic universe of rogue states.
And in response, the quote-unquote villains organized. Iran eventually formalized its own network of proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, militias in Iraq and Syria, and they explicitly called it the axis of resistance. They just took the rhetoric and flipped it right back.
So you're going to call us an axis. We'll be an axis.
They lean into it.
Which brings us to today.
Yeah.
Because the phrase just refuses to die. We're seeing it resurrected now in 2024, but the cast of characters has changed. A lot.
This is the new axis of evil. You hear it from figures like Senator Mitch McConnell, Speaker Mike Johnson. They're using it to describe the alignment of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
But this is where we really have to slow down and analyze the structure, right? The original axis was defined by weakness and isolation.
Yes.
Iran and Iraq were contained. This new axis, though, China is an economic superpower. Russia is a nuclear giant. This isn't just a list of countries we don't like. This feels like a genuine rival bloc.
That's the critical difference. The new axis argument suggests a level of interdependence that just didn't exist in 2002. I mean, look at the war in Ukraine. You have Iranian drones being used by the Russian military.
Shaheeds, yeah.
You have North Korea shipping artillery shells to the front lines. You have China providing the economic lifeline that's keeping the Russian economy afloat despite all the sanctions.
So unlike that marriage of convenience from described, where Germany and Japan barely talked, these guys are actually trading hardware. They're keeping each other's economies alive.
It's become transactional. And it's strategic. British General Sir Patrick Sanders just made this point in July of 2024, arguing this new quartet is actually more interdependent and more aligned than the original Axis powers of World War II ever were.
That is a terrifying thought. The idea that we've gone from containing isolated rogue states to facing a coordinated nuclear-armed bloc.
But we have to be careful with the label. Are they an axis in an ideological sense? Does China really share a worldview with the theocracy in Tehran?
Probably not.
No. China wants global stability for trade. Iran often thrives on asymmetric chaos. Russia wants to rebuild an empire. North Korea just wants regime survival.
So it's still a marriage of convenience, just a much more dangerous one. They're united by what they're against American power, not what they're for.
Exactly. But the danger of using the axis of evil term again is that it might have the exact same effect it had in 2002. It groups them together. If we treat them as a monolith, we might just push them closer together.
It's that self-fulfilling prophecy all over again. You tell 4 guys in a bar that they're a gang you're going to fight. Well, they're probably going to start acting like a gang.
And that overlooks the opportunities to split them apart. I mean, Realpolitik would suggest you try to peel China away from Russia, not lump them together. But the Axis rhetoric, it just flattens all that nuance. It demands a crusade.
Okay, before we get too heavy on the impending geopolitical doom,
Right.
we have to talk about how the phrase didn't just stay in the Situation Room. It bled into pop culture in some really weird and interesting ways.
It became a punchline almost instantly. When you use language that's that high drama, comedians are just going to feast on it.
The Axis of Evil comedy tour was huge.
Yeah.
Majd Dobrani, Ahmed.
Yeah.
They took this terrifying label and just defanged it through humor.
It was a way for Middle Eastern communities to sort of process the demonization, but there was also a softer side to the cultural reaction. There was that Norwegian music project.
Lullabies from the Axis of Evil.
Right.
In 2003, they recorded women from Iran, Iraq, and North Korea singing traditional lullabies to their babies.
It was such a simple, subversive idea. You have the president saying these nations are evil with a capital E, and then you just hear a mother in Baghdad singing to her child. It forces you to remember a nation isn't just its regime.
It puts the humanity back.
Exactly.
And then, of course, the Axis of Weasels.
The Axis of Weasels. That was aimed at France and Germany for not supporting the Iraq invasion. It just shows how that grammatical structure, axis of blank, became the template for anything we didn't like.
So to bring it all back, we started with the speechwriter in 2001, trying to solve a puzzle. How to convince Americans to worry about Iraq. He reaches for a WWII analogy. He swaps hatred for evil.
And in doing so, he defines a decade of war and completely unintentionally torpedoes this incredible moment of potential peace with Iran.
It's a profound lesson in the lethality of language. Words in foreign policy aren't just descriptions, they're actions. Calling a country evil isn't just name-calling, it's a policy decision. It sets a trajectory that's incredibly hard to reverse.
It really is.
And now, as we hear new axes of evil being thrown around about China and Russia, we have to ask ourselves, are we describing a reality or are we creating one?
That's the question, isn't it? Are we seeing a genuine coordination of evil, or are we using a lazy historical analogy that blinds us to the very different motivations of each of those countries? Because if we treat them like a single monster...
It might just ensure they become one. It's a lot to think about. The next time you hear a politician drop a catchy historical phrase, maybe check the footnotes. Thanks for diving in with us today.
Always a pleasure.